Good morning and welcome to Emergency Vision's webinar, Public-Private Partnerships for Capacity Building at the Local Level. As Superstorm Sandy demonstrated, catastrophic emergencies can overwhelm the response capacities of local jurisdictions. Increasingly, communities and counties are reaching out to nonprofit, mutual aid, and corporate partners in order to improve their capacity and respond to emergencies. Our webinar this morning will focus on the successful public-private partnerships utilized to foster emergency response capacity at the local level. We will also discuss the use of technologies to improve the community's ability to catalog the assets required to respond to all hazard emergency situations. Our webinar this morning will last 30 minutes and with 15 minutes for questions and answers following the presentations. Feel free to utilize the chat window throughout the webinar for any questions. We will aggregate and ask our speakers to address each at the conclusion of the prepared remarks. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sean Smith, President and Founder of Emergency Visions. Sean founded Emergency Visions in 2002 and has worked with a multitude of corporations, governments, and NGOs in the development of the company's emergency management and response logistics solution response vision. Sean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning to everyone. I really appreciate the attendance today at this webinar on public-private partnerships for capacity building. And we'll go ahead and get started. And we'll get started with this statement. Your receipt of Department of Homeland Security fiscal year 2013 Homeland Security grant funding will be based upon an evaluation of ongoing improvements in local response capacity. And that comes from the DHS Grants Program Directorate Information Bulletin 3385A that came out about the second quarter of last year. So saying it again, what we're going to be talking about today, building capacity at the local level, is now a requirement if you want to receive Department of Homeland Security funding. So let's figure out how we got to this point. And you have to go all the way back to the beginning of the whole community approach to emergency management that came through with Presidential Policy Directive 8. So PPD 8 was designed to facilitate an integrated whole community or all-of-nation capabilities-based approach to preparedness, and to do so involving not just the traditional domestic emergency management orientation, which was local folks, responders, the state emergency management agency, and their federal partners, but now to include the private sector, NGOs, faith-based and other organizations to keep people and communities safe and to prevent the loss of life and property when disaster strikes. So PPD 8 called for the development and maintenance of a national preparedness goal. And the national preparedness goal defined the core capabilities necessary for you to be able to respond to the different kinds of all-hazard incidents that pose the greatest risk to the security of the nation. So that directive went further and called for a national preparedness system, and that provided with the guidance, organization, equipment, training exercises you need to build your local capacity and capabilities to respond in support of that national preparedness goal. And most recently, the twist in PPD 8 was the addition of Thyra. Thyra is a new way to start measuring in your risk, and the risk is not just risk against different hazards, it is also based on the time of the year, other geographic and regional components. We'll get into Thyra in just a little bit. So coming from PPD 8, again, was the National Preparedness Goals and the National Preparedness System. The National Preparedness System outlines an organized process for everyone in the whole community to move forward with your preparedness activities and to achieve the National Preparedness Goal at the local level. That starts out with identifying and assessing your risk to man-made, technological, and natural hazards, to estimate your own capacity to respond, basically what kinds of assets do you have, what credentialed personnel do you have locally, being able to validate your existing response capacities, and then to be able to stretch beyond that to the rest of the whole community to now improve your capacity to respond to emergency situations. A good example would be after the devastating tornadoes that went through the southern tier of states. Ringgold, Georgia, certainly had a tornado as a possibility for a threat, but they didn't have the capacity to respond to one that would literally level the town. They had to reach out to the state partners and also to local corporate partners and NGOs to be able to respond to and recover from that devastating event. So you've got to have a plan to deliver your capabilities and then to build and sustain it across the whole community over time. And based on Thyra, which we'll get into in a second, you have to be able to review that and to update it and to measure your improvements through this whole community approach to emergency management. All right, so Thyra makes an interesting twist to it. The FEMA whole community approach came out a little over a year ago. They followed that on with Thyra, and they followed that on with changes in the Department of Homeland Security fiscal funding that requires a Thyra in part of the state's preparedness plans to start measuring your capabilities of responding to specific risks. And Thyra is a common process that helps you to identify, understand, manage, and communicate the risks and threats within the context of your local community. It identifies the outcomes and determines how each specific natural, man-made, or technological threat or hazard could affect your community through the lens of the core capabilities in the National Preparedness Goal definitions. It sets the level of your capacity to respond, to prevent, protect, mitigate against, respond to, and recover from those risks that are identified. And then based on these targets, it helps you to figure out and to measure where you can identify and obtain the assistance that you need from corporate partners, from nonprofit partners, faith-based organizations, and other folks within the whole community to help you to counter these identified threats. Note that it does assume a focus on the pooling of resources. It assumes that you can't do it alone and that you're going to need these other folks within your whole community to help build and sustain your capacity to respond to not only catastrophic threats, but the more common things that can stress out your local response capacities, flooding events, wildfires, things of that nature. The source of Thyra can be found in the Comprehensive Preparedness Guide 201 that was detailed in April of 2012. So note that Thyra is an ongoing process. It is related to whole community preparedness efforts. It asks for you to identify your mutual aid partners, the communities and counties near you, to identify the nonprofit partners, faith-based organizations, and then your corporate partners that are there that can provide existing resources, equipment, heavy equipment, supplies, watercraft, aircraft, whatever you might need to respond to an emergency situation. It also helps you to stretch out your capacity to support the survivors from events. Give a good example is the Baptist that provide the kitchens down to the folks in the state of Florida. That is one of our customers of Emergency Visions. It's a great example of providing capacity to provide feeding, in addition to what the local folks have. It's going to ask you to prioritize your response capacity and your reach back so that when you need different kinds of things, whether it's to feed people, whether it's to shelter people, whether it's to provide additional resources in specific areas such as special needs cots or things of that nature, where do you go to get that reach back and where are your sources? It's going to also ask you to credential your own personnel and also to credential the volunteers that are coming in to help you and make sure you've got the right people in the right place and the right amounts to support the event that's happening on your doorstep. All of this information needs to make it into your emergency operations plans, your incident response plans, and your mitigation plans. You need to be able to revise those in accordance with what you find out through the Thyra. And then ultimately you need to actually make more in terms of a reach back to your whole community partners and actually bring them into your emergency management program and start exercising these plans so that it's more than just a handshake, but you've got people that know what they're doing when the event occurs. Note that these Thyra results are the first steps of the state preparedness results. Urban areas are now required to develop and maintain a Thyra as well as states, but ultimately you're going to see this moving down, we believe, to the local level to any jurisdiction, and that you're going to have to be able to develop your own Thyra, make the modifications, measure your capacities, and that right now within the urban areas and the states, receipt of 2013 grant funding is based on their evaluation of your ongoing improvements in response capacity as illustrated by performance measurements, which lends you to the question, how do I document this? How do I take my Thyra? How do I measure that things are getting better over time? One of the great examples that we have of providing a reach back is to look at our corporate partners. And we are pleased here. I'm going to turn it back to Paul Noon to introduce Dale Herzog, Director of Humanitarian Logistics with UPS. And Dale will be telling us a bit about what they do in the world of emergency response efforts. So, Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our guest, our special guest, Dale Herzog. Dale has over 35 years of experience with the United Postal Service. The majority of his time has been spent in the industrial, engineering, product distribution, and logistics fields, with his last 4 years specializing in humanitarian logistics and capacity building. Areas of concentration for Dale include warehouse layout and design, operational improvement analysis, information flow analysis, supply chain logistics, and warehouse management systems analysis. He's currently working in a capacity building role, working through the UPS Foundation to bring UPS expertise into the NGO operation. Dale's NGO experience has come mainly through working with CARE USA, where he serves as a full-time advisor, and to the Vice President of Logistics for the CARE Supply Chain Unit. Dale, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
a pleasure to be here today, and so I'm going to start going through and talk about humanitarian assistance and supply chains in general. What we found through working with the UPS Foundation, of course, they've been very active in working and trying to support humanitarian groups, NGOs, CARE specifically, as we just talked about. But what we found is that humanitarian assistance is a global growth market. There are natural and man-made disasters. The forecast is just exponential over the next 50 years to continue to go up. We see a lot of that because of the movement of urban populations from the urban areas to the coastal areas where they're much more subjected to flooding type situations. Obviously, HIV and AIDS continue to be a challenge on everybody's radar screen right now. And it basically is just accelerating the need for long-term growth assistance and development programs. Donors and governments are also turning away from the handouts, the grants. What they're looking for is sustainability. They really don't want us to go in and dig a well, to show up, do the flash and dash, bring the cameras in, dig a well, and then walk away from it. They want us to show them how to dig it. They want us to show them how to maintain it. And it's a huge issue because, you know, we see it on TV all the time. Somebody comes in, they dig a well, and then they after the cameras are gone, the well is there, and it operates for a year or whatever, and then it's gone. They don't have the parts. There's no sustainability. So sustainability is a key issue right now. The humanitarian sector lacks critical supply chain skill sets, specifically in logistics. There's limited amount of funding that goes around, and everybody's being competitive, and everybody's trying to compete for that funding. And of course, one of the areas that typically is hurt is the supply chain area. So we wind up having low-skilled people in those positions where it really does become a massive cost to NGOs throughout the world. Billions and billions of dollars worth of materials are sitting in warehouses right now where they're tracked on hundreds, if not thousands, of different versions of Excel spreadsheets. The humanitarian sector is also very fragmented. Certainly, it is decentralized, and it further limits NGO supply chain effectiveness. Basically, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing not only from one warehouse to warehouse within a geographical area, but also from one country office to another country office. Humanitarian assistance, the market is massive. As a matter of fact, if you, some numbers that came out a while back, if you take all of the assistance and you roll it up together, you're looking at roughly about the 8th largest economy in the world. With UPS being a transportation company, obviously this is something that has our attention. Right now, the last study that we were looking at looks at about total about $6 billion in global logistics spend alone. That's broken down into two different segments: emergency relief aid, and you've got a $1.2 billion global spend, about $2.27 billion in the U.S., and then you've got development aid, and that's even a larger segment of the global spend. Development aid is very important. That's actually where your emergency aid is able to be drawn from. If you've got development programs in foreign countries where there's a natural disaster, your NGOs are going to pull from that development aid so that they can handle the immediate emergency response. One of the things that we found, and is an ongoing problem, and has been for many decades, and that is NGOs are just not able to fix their own problems. Large NGOs have structures. They're very decentralized from a planning and decision-making point. Local country offices often operate autonomously and are basically the supply and the decision-making power, and they hold the power for purchasing, for transportation, and of course that really doesn't help from an aggregation standpoint. There's a complete lack of visibility of supply chains, products. And also there's a challenge of accountability when you don't have that visibility. Very ineffective supply chain systems that encourage corruption. Again, without the accountability, you're going to have the opportunity, or you create a vacuum where corruption can easily move in. The culture of competition among NGOs fails to leverage significant global and national collaboration opportunities. It would be one thing if we already had a mechanism in place for multiple NGOs to aggregate their procurement of either tents or blankets or some of the major emergency supplies, but because the procurement is so decentralized down to the country office level, now instead of just trying to get multiple NGOs to work together, you could be trying to get 60 or 70 country offices to work together, and that just doesn't happen. They don't have the time or the personnel, so they just do what they have to do, and they place the orders. And unfortunately, again, with multiple warehouses in one country office, the right hand typically doesn't know what the left hand is doing. Certainly there's a misalignment of sourcing and procurement. Storage, again, transportation is a tremendous issue. And then distribution with constrained resources. The capacities, again, are very limited and, again, a challenge. Unfortunately, there's a dependency on donations and grants, and that comes with under the banner of restricted funding. That certainly limits the ability to pre-purchase and pre-position. That's been a big challenge that we've seen from the very beginning with our relationship with CARE. Because funding is restricted, I can't pre-purchase. The folks who are providing the donations and the grants, unfortunately, it's not very glamorous to write a check for $1 million to pre-purchase supplies when they're at a reasonable cost. Unfortunately, the money typically flows after the disaster, and that's when the prices have gone up 7 times. My $1 million grant now becomes worth $125,000, and again, just one more issue and problem that the NGO community faces. The UPS experience to date in the humanitarian sector, and this is from penetrating it from a business development perspective, it's a very long sales cycle, and the standard BD approach is typically not effective. There's a profound lack of trust between NGOs and for-profits. For-profits need to view opportunities as long-term investments. It took us 2 years working within the Red Cross to be able to work in a capacity building function for them. They've been very, very open over the last year or so, and we're developing our relationship with them, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us, and we believe also for the Red Cross it's a wonderful opportunity for them. There are also some issues and challenges with creating self-imposed barriers. You've got just a little bit of a challenge between the UPS and the foundation and a mechanism for providing funding, and then also you've got the business side where we are trying to develop and trying to move product that is being paid for and that it always is going to be moved. So there's a little bit of a challenge within or inside of organizations from that perspective. Engagements typically begin with the most help needed areas, emergency relief normally that follow disasters. That kind of moves us into the ongoing capacity support opportunities, and that's usually what drives our ability to get inside of the organization and to sell ourselves and to open up opportunities. Trust builds as the need as we uncover additional opportunities within the organization. One of the very successful programs that we're working right now, this is through the U.S. government, is PEPFAR. It's a very successful model for UPS, and we look forward to that to continue. Our experience to date, that's roughly about a $20 billion project or contract that was started in 2003. One of the main things that we've been able to do with our side of that of the planning process and handling the logistics for PEPFAR is we've been able to move roughly actually in the beginning they were only moving 5% of the goods were being shipped ocean, and 95% were actually being shipped via air. Obviously, if it goes air, it's a expedited shipment due to lack of planning, and you're going to have a very expensive price tag that goes along with that. And what we've been able to do over the years, since 2006, now in 2011 last year, roughly about 70% is now moved ocean and 30% is moved through the air. So that's been a drastic increase and a drastic savings, and we've been able to provide that back to the U.S. government. And it's helped and enhanced our reputation with the government and our standing within the NGO community. One of the things that we're working on right now is what we call Sustained Global Partnership. And if you remember a few slides back, one of the bullet points we covered was a challenge within organizations or within NGOs to provide standardized logistics, standardized consolidated procurement. And what we've done with and working with or creating the Sustain, we're working with several other NGOs. We're working with CARE, we're working with World Vision, we've got UPS Foundation behind it, Georgia Tech University, and a couple of other consulting agencies. And Sustain basically Sustain stands for Supply Strategies Aid and Innovation Network. And what we're trying to do is we're just trying to competitively respond in an economic and sourcing and procurement environment. We're trying to standardize the supply chain practices, trying to elevate procurement from a country-by-country situation where now we're starting to consolidate not only country by country but NGO by NGO, and trying to drive economies of scale and trying to drive down the high cost of goods. We're trying to improve the utilization of appropriate gifts in kind resources. We're looking at the technology innovations that need to be in place to enhance pipeline visibility and drive best-in-class supply chain management, and also trying to create an investable entity that allows for NGOs dedicated participation while increasing their unrestricted funding through dividend returns. So basically we have two pieces of this. We have Sustain Source Plus, which is the investment entity, and then we have Sustain Global Partnership, which is the 501c3 that's going to be more dedicated toward handling grants and the education process. How Sustain delivers, providing key logistics and skills outsourcing. As we talked a little bit before, one of the key areas that we find with most NGOs is that there's a tremendous lack of skills in the logistics area. So this is a component that we feel like we can target and concentrate. It also allows NGOs to kind of step back and focus on their core competencies. Logistics is a very specific skill set. It's highly prized even within the commercial industry. It drives very competitive wages, and it's one of the issues and challenges that because of that high competitive wage, it's very hard to find competent logistic people who are able and on the market and available to the NGO world, typically again with in an economic environment where salaries are much more competitive. We've got the economies of scale and consolidating procurement across multiple NGOs. Several things that we're looking at or targeting in the future: fuel, vehicles, parts, and computers. And consolidated procurement is a two-edged sword, because we don't want to get to a point where we're pulling money out of the country office, because money that flows into those country offices is specifically designed to help rebuild the economies of the local economy. What we're targeting is we're targeting commodities that can't be sourced in country, such as fuel or vehicles or spare parts. All of these parts are going to be imported. So that's one of the reasons why we're trying to consolidate on those specific areas. Again, trying to decrease the cost of the overall supply chain and provide value back to the NGO world or NGO community. It enables a secure and visible supply chain. Obviously, it increases operational efficiency, drives accountability, reduces corruption and shrinkage opportunities. and improves the donor approval and ongoing support. Donors want more. They're wanting more and more all the time. We live in a society right now where we've got a tremendous amount of information that's available everywhere. And we're getting smarter and smarter donors, and they're driving this change. They want the accountability. They want the visibility, and they want to know where their dollars are going and how they're being spent. It also, one of the other things we're trying to do is, because there is so much power and there's so much of a focus on the individual country office level, and that being a very strategic decision-making point, what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish strong local logistics campuses, because again, the decision-making process is at the country office level and not necessarily at the corporate level. So where are we going to start? We're starting in Honduras. This is basically a test pilot. There's a tremendously large humanitarian logistics pipeline. It's controlled largely by the government. The humanitarian sector there is very actively supported by the government. Sustained CEO Rio Duran is a Honduran national. He's very familiar with the local needs and very well-established connections both within the government and commercial sectors. We feel like the network can be quickly established. This is a relatively small geographical area, and we want to start small and then scale the process as we prove it within that country environment. I feel like it's also going to be easier to control and develop and replicate the model starting in one country. One of the other reasons why we chose Honduras is because there is a very well-established NGO network. Just so happens that World Vision and CARE, who are two of the main sponsors from the NGO side, also chair a large network in Honduras. There's a consortium of about 90 NGOs that are chaired by these two organizations. We're also targeting, from a regional perspective, Panama, because Panama is a regional campus to support Honduras. It's also a growth in additional Latin American and Caribbean countries. Obviously, there's a widening of the Panama Canal as a strategic focus for UPS, and we feel like it's going to be a good place for a regional hub to target Central America. So we talked a little bit about some of the different key areas, talked about vehicles and spare parts and fuel, and what we decided to do is we decided to settle on fuel aggregation. That's one of the largest budget items for many NGO country offices. The fuel aggregation attracts NGOs as a key decision level for local management, and it's really a no-brainer when you look at the challenges that many NGOs face. Most of them are not walking around with debit cards. They would have to establish specific alliances with local gas dealers and local gas stations. It also drives, or one of the challenges for NGOs, it drives a lot of cash into their system, where people workers within the NGO organization have to drive around with cash so they've got cash to purchase fuel. That's a big challenge. We've got the other issue is that UN agency alignment, interagency cooperation has always proven elusive at every level. And what we found so far with fuel is it's kind of a common bond. Everybody knows they're going to spend it. Everybody knows they've got to use it. Everybody knows that they would like to have more control over their vehicles, or more control over the miles driven, and less cash in the system. So we felt like fuel was going to be just a natural for that. There's a significant front and door opportunity that we can expand to broader cooperation across multiple service offerings. While we started with World Vision and with CARE, we are finding many organizations stepping up and saying that fuel is a challenge, it's a problem, and we want to be in on the ground floor as we develop this program, and then obviously hopefully that will open us up to move much deeper into their operations and to take on more of their procurement. Major benefit: it addresses security issues, like I said, removes cash out of the daily operations. You'll have mileage verification controls that will enhance accountability, and then, of course, visibility and controls to help minimize fraud and shrinkage. Fuel aggregation is just a start. It's natural. We've got a big challenge with fertilizer and farm equipment. So many small organizations spread out across Honduras that the government has asked us to not only get the fuel thing going so we develop a base for the organization, but now we're also looking at fertilizer and farm equipment because there's almost 3,500 small farm associations that again, have to purchase and don't have the ability to aggregate their purchase, and we're going to do that, and hopefully do that for the Honduran government as an arm of or an aggregator for the government. So we think this is going to lead into another opportunity, and then somewhere down the road we'll look at the vehicles and the replacement parts, and then possibly other supplies again, such as computer hardware and other large budget items that are typically not available in the country. Sustained growth plans, just moving from Honduras, hopefully into some of the other areas. Bangladesh is an opportunity, Guatemala. We see Honduras establishing or moving faster or developing from Honduras into the Central America area, and then a couple of years down the road, looking to going more toward Asia. Tremendous amount of opportunity with the countries that we have listed, but we see this as a need in every country. So why is it important to UPS? Well, it provides us better penetration into the humanitarian supply chain. Again, we talked a little bit about it before. It's roughly about the 8th largest economy in the world, so certainly something that the largest transportation provider in the world is going to look into. Definitely some revenue opportunity for UPS. People are spending money, organizations are spending money, governments are spending money on the movement of these goods. So it's an area that we like to be more involved with. Healthcare sector provides adjacent opportunities. It's a major priority for governments. It's a major priority for UPS and for NGOs. There's a potential for greater access to developing markets. I think we're in 208 countries right now. Obviously, there are some other countries that we would certainly be interested in moving into. It definitely meets our social responsibility requirements, and it goes far beyond just doing the right thing. We certainly have the capability within the organization to reach into these communities and to work with NGOs. We certainly don't mind providing our expertise, and we think it's a great opportunity. And again, it capitalizes on UPS expertise. I mean, we are a logistics and engineering company. It's what we do. And also helps us to build additional expertise and relationships across multiple boundaries, NGOs and governments. And obviously there's challenges as we move forward as a company, as we develop and we grow.
All right, Dale, thank you very much. This is Sean Smith again. I'm going to kind of wrap up this part, but before I do, I want to not only thank Dale for his thoughts, but I want to go back to this slide here, and I find it very fascinating and interesting and exciting to hear that organizations like UPS are bringing their logistics expertise to help nonprofit organizations to become more cost-effective and more coordinated in the way that they deliver aid. And that can only make them better as they're delivering assistance both domestically in the U.S. and around the world. So really appreciate UPS and their partnership with the nonprofit community. I also wanted to leave the slide up for a second for the folks that are on the webinar that represent local and state governments in the United States to bring to your attention that this is not just an isolated UPS-only thought process here. There are other corporations that have social responsibility and corporate social responsibility efforts that are out there, and there are also certainly lots of private sector organizations that want to serve as good, coordinated, cost-effective suppliers to local emergency management agencies and state emergency management agencies when the disaster hits your door. So reach out into your own local corporate world, find your UPSs, and start building relationships with them. to help take their expertise and to bring it to bear to help you become better in your own operational response efforts, and to reach out to your other NGO partners that you do work with, like they've done work with the American Red Cross, Dale mentioned, because that can only make things all the way better for the whole community. We'd like to close the webinar talking a bit about tools and techniques to help you build, measure, and sustain your capacity at the local level, domestic U.S. And certainly there are different methods. You know, Dale mentioned all the thousands of spreadsheets in the nonprofit world. There are certainly hundreds and thousands of spreadsheets in the domestic emergency management world as well. But unfortunately, that's not really the best method of being able to assess your risks, to be able to identify your response capacities, and then to be able to move that into your own operational world. Many organizations lack the subject matter expertise to appropriately respond to different kinds of hazard events, and there are different kinds of technologies out there, from EOC automation systems to credentialing systems, but they're not often very integrated and coordinated. An integrated technology solution would provide you with secure, scalable, connected systems for measurement from Thyra into your plans and into your response capacities, both within your own local staff, your credentialing of your staff, as well as the resources you may have, law enforcement, fire service, and EMS vehicles, bulldozers from public works and other things that do debris removal, all those things that need to be cataloged as part of your capacity to respond to different emergency situations. If you have an integrated system, the whole community capacity could be easier to analyze, measure, and report on. An example of that is a technology such as the one that you see here that can really move through the cycle from mitigating against your risks, being able to take those Thyra measurements, making them online and real, identifying the suppliers both that you have for your local community, being able to do mitigation, risk reduction, and messaging and outreach to your whole community partners, and then being able to flow that into the resource management of what physical, equipment, supplies, heavy equipment, aircraft, watercraft do you have, what kind of staff do you have and what are their credentials, how do you get more volunteers in your network that you need, and then how does that flood into your emergency response plans, your mitigation plans, in a way that you can bring the whole community to bear in the simulation drill exercise world and make them all real and more coordinated in the response to emergency situations. Your event and operations management, mission and tasking system, the way you coordinate and visualize your personnel and your team structures and your resources through geospatial maps, the ability of then flowing that back into the recovery phase over to damage, field-based damage and disaster relief assessments, or distribution management if you're activating pods in your local communities. All that should be part of an integrated kind of system. And certainly logistics is in the center of all that, so how you procure the things that you need, how you move them to where they need to be, how you manage them when you get there, if you need to store them along the way through a warehouse or a staging area. Your system for capacity building and response needs to be integrated. Now, does that mean that you have to throw out the systems you have? No, absolutely not. If you've got an existing EOC automation system or technology, an existing badging system, and an existing credentialing system, absolutely just pull that in. But you need to have an integrated approach that can help you to build the capacity, measure the capacity, and sustain it over time. The key benefits to doing that is it provides you an end-to-end solution. It helps to identify your mutual aid partners, your nonprofit partners in the corporate capacities, and you can measure them and include them in. You can address all hazard types, which is required for Thyra, of course, across the calendar year, because certainly, interestingly enough, in Tampa this last August, the #1 threat was not a hurricane, but it was actually the Republican National Convention, and they were dealing with that special event. And they had a different set of corporate partners and NGO partners that were participating in that event response. So as Thyra indicates now, it's not just the threats and hazards, it's the timing of the event, and it's who you need to help respond to that. But it also, you should be looking for a system that not only addresses your response capacity and your ability to measure it over time, but provides you daily operational value. So, discovering what you need, moving it where it needs to be, and managing it when it gets there applies to not just catastrophic situations, but also everyday events. Flooding that's occurring right now in Louisiana, the wildfires that have occurred in different parts of the nation, things that you are threatened with on a daily basis. Now, governments, NGOs, and corporations collaborate each and every day on non-emergency situations. So do identify who those folks are and bring them on in. The takeaways that we hope you find from this webinar is that building, measuring, and sustaining capacity at the local level is not just a good idea, but it's something that's mandatory if you're going to pursue Department of Homeland Security funding. That's number one. Number two, you need to change your definition of a supplier. People think of suppliers as just private contractors. The supplier is your mutual aid partner, the county next door. The supplier is folks like UPS that do logistics expertise and movement of things all day long and twice on Sundays globally that can help you get things where they need to be a lot quicker. You need to look to the private sector to provide capacity in not only catastrophic scenarios, but also, again, for the daily events that stress your local capability to respond to an emergency situation. You need to forge your relationships with these partners right now. Reach out to them, identify them. An interesting example comes from a customer of ours in Minnesota, 40,000 citizen community, and they had already a supplier network of over 250 that included the counties and communities next door and their credentialed personnel and their assets. It also included the local ACE hardware. Why? Because they provide generators that they need. They included the local Motel 6. Why? Because when the shelters were overfull, that was their overflow for capacity. So even a 40,000 citizen community can have over 250 suppliers, and the ability to identify who those people are, reach out to them, measure your capacity to respond, and know where to reach out even further beyond that network when you need it is exactly what Thyra is asking you to do. That's going to be a requirement for your Homeland Security funding. And then finally, look for a technology solution that can help you to measure your capabilities against identified risks, but select one that also provides daily value to your operations and can literally help you provide value across the entire disaster management lifecycle. So, Paul, we've now hit the end of our webinar here. So we just want to thank you for attending, and we've got some time for questions now. If folks are typing in questions into the chat box, feel free to do that, and we'll answer it. So, Paul,
I have several that I've consolidated to 3 basics here, and I will ask those questions to you and Dale. Dale, you're getting the majority of those, and then I'll also talk a little bit about our upcoming webinar, next webinar coming up in February. Dale, the first question really relates to sort of some domestic work that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about how UPS is affecting domestic emergencies, or a little bit about U.S.-based UPS work?
It's a great question. Yes, we've done a lot of work over the last 2 or 3 years. We continue to develop a program we call a LET program with the American Red Cross, where it started off initially with the basically what we call the hurricane states. So it would be Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Alabama. And we have teams that are set up, basically go teams that are set up in a situation where the Red Cross puts the team in action. We will pull them out of their normal, typical UPS responsibilities, and we will make them available to work with the Red Cross in the initial early onset and the initial recovery process, typically anywhere from a 1 to 2 week assignment, and we have as many as 4 or 5 people in each state that are designated to work in this program. It's been very innovative, and it's something that the Red Cross is looking to possibly expand. They're looking at also asking for some of our expertise in loan management program, moving people into the American Red Cross to help them. So just a very wonderful relationship with both organizations, and it's proving itself.
Yeah, and Dale, as sort of a follow-up related to logistics, we've got a couple questions related to shrinkage or loss that occurs as a result of poor logistics. Is that sort of a driver in UPS reaching out to these organizations, both domestically and international?
It is, and again, you know, we've got 2 organizations here. First off, the UPS Foundation, and they're providing grant dollars to these organizations. Honestly, it was a huge challenge for us because normally organizations will accept money as grants. They don't necessarily want an industrial engineer coming around and poking around the organization. And so that was a big challenge, and I'd actually mentioned that in one of the slides. We were talking about the 2-year process to work inside of the American Red Cross. You're coming in as an engineer, and that's a perception that hopefully organizations will be able to look past, because when we come in, we're not coming in to find out what you're doing with the money. We're saying, okay, you are where you are. Now, let's make you better from now on, and let's find opportunities to cut the cost in the supply chain to increase accountability. That's one of the hallmarks of UPS is accountability, and that's what we feel like we can bring.
The other question that came up, and Sean, you had a specific slide that addressed it, which was, spreadsheets seem to be a pretty common method for managing supplies and equipment. And the question sort of comes up is, can you really effectively track goods and measure costs and those kinds of things in spreadsheets?
That's a great question, and it's difficult. One of our local government clients literally had 57 spreadsheets worth of assets, and that had to do with vehicles to watercraft to equipment to 57 spreadsheets. And the problem is that across these spreadsheets, it's hard to maintain the currency of the data. It's hard to understand the cost of it. It's hard to tie it back to the grants that paid for it. It's hard to link it together when you're sending those out somewhere to figure out, who do I send it to and for how much? And, from a mutual aid, I'm trying to get reimbursed. What do they cost and for how long? Can't really do that on spreadsheets. But plus, in this scenario, they had an equipment which was a defibrillator. And I don't know if I could spell defibrillator right now, Paul, but they had it spelled about 4 or 5 different ways across the spreadsheets. So you really couldn't have an idea of what was in your inventory at any one moment in time very easily through that technology. So that's part of the reason why we are applying emergency response logistics technology, and what we do for emergency visions is to kind of solve that issue and to make data more reasonable and more actionable.
Sean, I think we're going to end with that one. I'd like to remind the group of our next webinar. We'll be presenting a full life cycle emergency management utilizing Emergency Visions Response Vision 4.0, which Sean touched on a little bit there. The webinar will be hosted by our partner Carasoft, who has made Response Vision available via the GSA schedule. So look for an invitation to follow up to that. Each of our attendees today will receive a follow-up email as well, and we will provide links to the presentations via the website. Also, feel free to reach out directly if there are any additional questions. We appreciate your time. Thank you all, and have a great week.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.